Guys, it's so great to be with you all this evening. So great to have you here. Thank you so much. If you haven't met before, like Alani said, my name's Fernando, and I've just loved looking at the story of Abraham and Sarah because it's so real. And what I love about the Bible is that it doesn't kind of paint out the lives of the characters out as if they're perfect, as though they did everything right. The Bible shows the story and their lives, I think, exactly what life is like, full of ups and downs, and their stories that we can all relate to. And as I was just contemplating on this, I really just felt like last week when they said I had to renew my ordinational vows, and one of the ordinational vows is to be responsible for the cure of souls for the parish. And it's such a huge responsibility, and it sounds kind of cool, the cure of souls. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that means, but we're figuring it out. But in this parish, I think there's over 50,000 people, and to get that responsibility is such an honor and such a privilege. And as I was reflecting, I was so overwhelmed by emotion that day because I just remember where God picked me up from. You know, I come from the pit, from a hole that's so horrible, so full of sin and brokenness. But He picked me up. He changed my life. And I think God is in the business of taking anybody, really anybody, and taking them from calling to promise. And I don't know how you might find yourself here this evening. You might not feel like you have a purpose. You might not feel like you have a calling. You might not know what it is that God wants to do in your life. You might feel like you've made too many mistakes. You might feel like you're too young. You might feel like you don't have the right skills, the right education. You might feel like you don't have what other people have, the gifts that you see in others. But no matter how you find yourself here, I want you to know that you have a calling on your life that's so much greater than you could ever imagine. And it's God's desire to release that calling in your life and take you from calling to promise. Last week, we started off looking at a few of the tests that Abraham and Sarah went through. Who remembers the first test? The step test, and taking a step out of Ur of the Chaldeans into the unknown. And I just wanted to ask, does anyone take a step of faith last week? Good, some steps of faith, good job. And one of the things I just wanted to clarify with this is that God is never going to, because some people were asking me about it afterwards, and just to clarify on a step of faith, God's never going to ask you to take a step of faith that contradicts His own word. So God's never going to ask you to take a step of faith, for example, and go out with or marry somebody that's not a Christian. Because it's not aligned with His own word. You have to be equally yoked. Sometimes people say, "Oh, step of faith." Yes, I finally got a confirmation. I can go out with that cute guy from uni halls. No. Or how about the integrity test? And it's of living a life that's blameless, that it's aligned of our beliefs and our actions. I wonder if anyone was tested in that way this week. Maybe to tell a white lie, or maybe to deceive, or maybe to just slightly tell not the whole truth in an area. It's the integrity test. Or what about the humility test and being able to put others before yourself, refusing to put yourself forward, refusing to compete, refusing to kind of strive for promotion and to be seen, but willingly choosing to put others before yourself. It's the humility test when Abraham chose to give his nephew Lot the land that was before them. And then we were going to get onto two more tests, the giving test. When Abraham met Melchizedek, he gave him a tithe of everything that he earned. And there's something about giving that's so close to God's heart because God loves a generous person. I wonder if God were to look at your finances and how you spend your money, would God say that He's first place in your life? People often say that if you can follow someone's heart by following where they give. It's the giving test. And I wonder if you're here today, have you put God first in your finances? Or how about the compromise test? We would have looked at last week, but Abraham and Sarah, when they got close to receiving the promise, Sarah just couldn't believe it would happen in her time. So she said to Abraham, well, how about Abraham, God's kind of taking a bit long. He promised us He'd give us a son. I'm getting a bit old. I kind of really want the promise now. I've got my friend Hagar here. What do you think about maybe you going with Hagar, sleeping with her? Maybe that way we can make the promise come about. Abraham was like, well, my darling Sarah, if it's your desire for me to take Hagar and sleep with her, if that's what you want, who am I to deny your wishes, my beautiful wife? And like the sin of Adam, he passively let go of the promises of God and took them into their own hands. And it's the compromise test. It's a test where we let go of the best that God has in store for us and settle for what we can do ourselves. And God doesn't want any of us to settle. He doesn't want any of us to compromise. He doesn't want any of us to take matters into our own hands because we're getting impatient. Yes, we're praying for marriages. We're praying for all those things. And you just think, Lord, I want that prayer to be answered. Maybe I'll just make it happen myself. And you get married to someone that you know doesn't have what you've been praying for, you know isn't really walking with God, you know isn't the person that God's placed on your heart, but you just think, well, it's taking too long, maybe I'll just take what's in front of me. It's the compromise test. It comes from a lack of faith. And God doesn't want any of you to compromise. He wants you to trust him, to believe that he'll provide. So we find Abraham and Sarah in that situation, and we see a few more tests that they're about to take in order to go from calling to promise. Let's look at the first test. It's called the get back up test. Let's go together to Genesis chapter 16. We're going to read Genesis 16, verses 16, and a few of the verses in chapter 17. So in verse 16, we read, Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. The next verse. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abraham, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I'll make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. So last time, like we've just said, we met Abraham and Sarah. They had failed the compromise test. They took Hagar in. And how old was Abraham when Ishmael was born? And how long was it before he met with God again? How many years is that? Oh, you guys were here this morning. So this morning, everyone was like, and then a few people got it wrong. Yeah, it was 13 years. And sometimes what ends up happening when we take matters into our own hands, it feels like there's a season when we don't hear from God. It feels like there's a season. I think God just allows that for us to really reflect on our lives, to reflect on the things that the decisions that we've made. But what happens in that moment of failure determines so much of what happens in our lives. I think Abraham probably had a good way of viewing his failure. And even though he knows that he compromised in that area, I think as I read that over those 13 years, every morning he woke up and said, Lord, here I am again. Lord, here I am again. Lord, here I am again. And I think that during those 13 years, God was just continuing to mold and shape his heart until he was ready to get back up. After those 13 years, the Lord appeared to Abraham as God Almighty, El Shaddai, and he appeared to him and changed his name. He breathed his ruach, his breath, into Abraham and changed his name. God's name, Yahweh, when that ha is the ruach that's breathed into Abraham and completely transforms him from the inside out. And as I was preparing this, I really just felt like there may be people who are here today who maybe there was a failure or a mistake or something that happened in your life that you just felt completely disqualified you. You just felt, no, I've made too many mistakes. No, I've compromised in that area too many times. No, God could never use me because I did this or that. But you need to know that God is in the business of restoring lives. God is in the business of resurrecting the dead. God is in the business of reconciliation, of restoration. And I truly believe that God is speaking to someone tonight and saying it's time for you to get back up. He's had enough of you sitting on the sidelines. He's had enough of you wallowing in your mistake. On the cross, Jesus died to forgive us of all our sin, our past, present, and future sin. And it's time for you to get back up and walk into your calling. I really felt God is just saying, it's enough. You don't need to wallow in it anymore. It's time for you to get back up, stand up, and walk into your calling. I love what Nelson Mandela says about this. He says, don't judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I've fallen down and gotten back up. I also heard it said that sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. One of the things we're going to be looking at today over these tests, I really think it's a framework for walking in freedom for the rest of our lives. And this get back up test is so key in understanding a framework for walking in freedom, because how we look at failure determines how we walk in freedom. So for example, you may fail in an area and you might think, well, I failed, I'll never be good enough, I'll always be the same. And the enemy will just lie to you. He'll say, look at what you've done, you're such a failure, you're such a horrible person, look at you worshiping, raising your hands and singing, and then look at what you do the very next day or even the same day. How could you? The enemy, when he speaks words of condemnation and words of shame, but he makes us believe that that's our identity. And that failure, he wants to use that to keep us down. And when we have a wrong view of failure, you might just have a fixed mindset and think, well, I'm always going to be the same. But that's not the right way to look at failure. The right way to look at failure is to say, okay, God, I've made a mistake. It's to acknowledge the failure. It's not to brush it over. The other wrong thing to do is to just brush it over, pretend it didn't happen, and keep going and then keep making the same mistake and brushing it over. What you want to do is, okay, yes, I've made a mistake. Lord Jesus, I ask you to forgive me. But then to say, but Lord, why did I do that? What was going on in my heart that led me to make that mistake? God, what was going on in the days and weeks prior to me making that mistake that almost it felt like I was walking into it without even realizing it? Have any of you ever found yourself after a failure and you just think, how on earth did I end up there after I promised myself I would never do that again? Well, it's because a failure doesn't happen one day to the next. There's been a seed that's been sown over a period of time, and the failure is just the fruit of that seed that was sown. So failure, what we have to do when those things happen in our life is to really take a moment and reflect and think, God, what was happening in my heart? Lord, where was I tempted? Lord, maybe was I tired? Was I feeling vulnerable? Was it something someone said to me? Or a good question to ask is, Lord, what lie am I believing about you? Or what lie am I believing about myself that meant that I would do this? What lie am I believing that meant that I would be so willing to give away my purpose, give away my calling, give away my birthright, give away everything you're doing in me? What would lead me to possibly do something like that? A good thing to do in these moments is to have people you confess this to. Have people you process this with. You know, something that we say at Christ Church Peckham is that all of us need to have someone in our life that knows everything about us. So that they're processing those things with you. So they can ask you the difficult questions. It's also helpful to go counseling, to go to therapy, to go to sozo, to go to whatever you need to go to help you process and really become self-aware of why you do what you do. And then when you've become self-aware and you understand, well, I'm a bit more tempted when this happens, or I feel vulnerable when that happens, or maybe I'm in a delicate situation when this happens, then when you'll become more self-aware, you can put safety nets and safeguards around yourself to prevent you from doing that again. Because God wants you to stand back up. He doesn't want you to dwell on your failure. He doesn't want that to derail you or disqualify you. If you think about it, the Bible is full of people who failed but got back up. David, he committed adultery and then murder, but was still called a man after God's own heart. Jacob was a deceiver, but was used to raise the 12 tribes of Israel. Gideon was hiding and afraid, but God raised him up to defeat the Midianites. Solomon went after idols and women, but was still the wisest man who ever lived and wrote the book of Proverbs. I love what Solomon himself writes. The righteous fall 7 times, but get back up. Can you turn to someone next to you and just say, it's time for you to get back up? So it's the get back up test. Let's look at the second test Abraham and Sarah went through. It's called the environment test. Let's turn one page to Genesis chapter 19, verses 23 to 27. So the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife, who was behind him, looked back, can you just say to the other person on the other side, don't look back. Say it again, don't look back. You don't need to look back. There's nothing there for you. Don't go backwards. Don't look back. It's not there. You've been there. You've done it. It's not there. You know, one of the things that I find so funny is like the Egyptians, they're so funny. You know, the Jewish people, they were in Egypt as slaves for so many years, and they were praying, Lord, please deliver us, deliver us, deliver us. God then delivers them with Moses. They're walking with God towards the promised land, and then they say, oh, it was so much better for us in Egypt. How could it have been better for you in Egypt when you were a slave, when you were being tortured and working all day, all night to do what they told you to do? Now you've been set free, walking with the Lord by day and night. He's guiding you towards the promised land, but you look back and think, oh, Egypt was so good. And I wonder if I don't think that ever happens with people here at Christ Church Peckham, but where you've been set free from a season or a situation, you walk in freedom for a period of time, and then for some reason we look back and think, oh, but that wasn't that bad. They were nice, weren't they, in the end of the day? I hated, when you were in it, you hated every moment of it, and you felt so bad, but when you get free for a little bit, you look back and think, oh, but I kind of missed them, or it wasn't all bad, was it? Like, they were really, Lydia, they were really good looking. And they smell good, yeah. They smell good. They bought me nice food. Isn't God like a God of grace? Like, shouldn't I? Yeah, just forgive them. And then we look back and we just keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. The book of Proverbs writes, it's a fool that returns to his vomit. Like a dog is a fool that returns to his vomit. What you need to know learn from this, don't look back. Say it again to someone else, please. Okay, so Lot's wife, she looked back and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. So if you remember last week when we were looking at the humility test, we looked at Lot because God had given him the best of the land. Who passed the humility test then? Okay, if you remember last week, we looked at the humility test, and Abraham got the choice of which land to take, but who passed the humility test? Good, because he just said, look, you take whichever land you want, I'll take the other land. What does Lot do? He takes the better land. He fails the humility test. He strives to go first. He strives to get what's best. But not only does he do that, remember I said we're going to go back to this verse next week. There's a bit that says there that's something that's so small that we could easily miss. Look what Lot does. It says that he pitched his tent close to Sodom. I was going to do another test today, but I did 5 last week, and they were like, hey, it's too much. But I would have done the prayer test, because here, remember, if you know the story, Abraham stands before God and intercedes for Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, Lord, if there's any righteous, would you deliver them? If there's any righteous, and he stands before them. And something that all of us need to understand, if we're going to go from calling to promise, you better believe you need to be a man or woman of prayer. You better believe you need to be somebody who's waking up early in the morning and interceding before God for yourself, for your church, for your city, for your nation. It's the prayer test. But Abraham prays for Sodom, and God says, okay, yes, Lot's there. I'm going to send an angel to deliver them, but I'm still going to bring fire down on the rest of them. So what does God do? He sends these 2 angels down to Sodom and Gomorrah. They go to Lot's house, and it's really a picture of how bad things have gotten in Sodom and Gomorrah. These 2 angels, they go to Lot's house, and it says all the men of the city were trying to get the 2 angels to rape them. Lot was in the house, and Lot didn't want that to happen to the angels, so Lot offers up his 2 daughters to the men of the city, and he says, they haven't slept with anyone, would you take them instead? Then, because the angels could see how far this had gotten, the angels send Lot and his family out of the city as the Lord begins to condemn Sodom and Gomorrah. And then that's when Lot's wife looks back. What do we remember about that? Don't look back. And then Lot and his 2 daughters, they find themselves in a cave because they were going to go to another city, but they end up staying in a cave. His 2 daughters are afraid of what's going to happen to them because they might not have children. What do? They take matters into their own hands, the compromise test. And then this is really horrific. And the reason I wanted to share this story is because when you read the Bible, you're going to come up with these stories, and it's better for us to talk about it here than when you just read it and think, oh my goodness, what's that? Lot's 2 daughters get the dad drunk, and they sleep with him, and they get pregnant. And I think what all of this has to tell us is that the world, the environment we place ourselves in really, really matters. The environment test is this. Look, Lot and his family were righteous in God's eyes. That's why God saved them. And you could be a Christian, you can be righteous in God's eyes, but if you place yourself as close to Sodom as you could possibly imagine, you better believe that God might still see you righteous, but you better believe that Sodom is going to get into you. The way of thinking of the world, the way of behaving of the world, the decision-making that the world has to offer, if you place your life as close to Sodom as you could possibly imagine, you better believe that that is going to influence the way you think and the way you live. The question for all of us as followers of Jesus, it's not how close can I get to sin without it being sin. The question isn't how close can I get to Sodom without it affecting me. The question should more be, how can I be more like Jesus and reflect him in everything that I do? I remember when I was growing up and I had just become a Christian, I was new in my faith. I wanted to serve God. I wanted to serve at church. God was changing me from the inside out. I had my first little job in IKEA, serving the meatballs and the gravy. But because I had just come out of this world of drugs and immorality, I kind of still liked house music. I used to go to these house parties, and so every now and again, I'd say to my mom, I'm just going to go to this kind of, to this. I didn't know how to. I'm going out, Mom. And she was like, well, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to go see some of my friends from before. I haven't seen them in a while. And she was like, well, are you sure that's wise? Why would you put yourself in a situation where there's going to be alcohol and drugs and all sorts of other things? And I used to say, well, it's going to be all right. I'm a Christian now. I'll be fine. Nothing's going to happen. So then I'll go. And then maybe the first time, everything will be okay. Maybe the second time, everything be okay. But then the third time, maybe just a little door would open. I'd just make a little mistake, it's not that bad. I'll be fine. Then I'll go back. And because I had opened that little door, maybe that little door opened just a little bit more. And then I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? But then because that door had been opened, I kind of just kept going back. And then before I knew it, I was already doing things that I was doing even before I gave my life to Jesus. And I used to think, well, how did I find myself in this situation? And it's the environment test. And I think with this environment test, I think the question all of us need to ask ourselves is this: am I shaping the world around me, or is the world around me shaping me? I was watching the Louis Theroux documentary last night. I forgot what it's called now. Entering the Manosphere. Have any of you watched that? Have you watched it? I actually really like Louis Theroux. I think he's so funny when he goes into prisons and stuff. But I started watching it last night to be more aware of what's going on in society at the moment. And I was just really so shocked by what I saw. I think that the things that those young men were talking about, it was just so full of, it's just so much brokenness, so much sin, that even after I couldn't watch the whole thing. I stopped watching it like halfway through. But I realized that after I had watched it, a lot of what they had said and spoken about, there was like a little seed that was sown in my mind. And I was even thinking about some of the things that they said, and the enemy uses every door you open, believe you me, the enemy will try and use that door to get into your mind. I mean, he's so sly. Look at what James writes about this. Each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. What that has to say is that the things that you look at, the things that you listen to, the conversations that you have, all of that is a seed that you sow in your heart or in your mind that sooner or later gives life to something. And you get to decide what you consume, what you listen to, what you watch, the conversations you have, the places that you go. Is that sowing a seed that's giving life, or is that sowing a seed that one day will bring death into your life? About a year and 3 months ago, I decided that I used to have Instagram, but I noticed in my heart that with Instagram, I had the temptation to either get proud of myself and the things that I was doing, or get jealous of other people. I would go on Instagram and I would notice that it would also be quite a danger if you ever press the search icon, you never know what's going to happen. And it's quite a dangerous button to press. And I realized that, even though I would go on it maybe to watch funny reels or to watch people's stories and to find out what's going on, through all those little, before I knew it, sooner or later, some reel, some picture, something would come up that would just be like a seed implanted in my mind. I wouldn't want to do it and act, but it would be like a seed that was sown that sooner or later was started to give fruit in my mind and my heart, either pride or jealousy or lust or something like that. And I just thought, why do I want this in my life? So I just made a decision to just completely, my mom's just laughing at that, good. I just made a decision just I just felt like I don't even want to engage in that. So I ended up just getting off of Instagram, and it's been almost a year and a half, and it's been amazing for me. But I think the question that all of us should think about is this: the things that I engage with, the things that I watch, the things that I listen to, is that shaping me, or am I shaping the world around me? I think all of us need to be wise about where we are with our walks with God. If you struggle or you're tempted with alcohol or drugs, you probably shouldn't put yourself in an environment where there's going to be alcohol or drugs. If you're tempted with lust or sexual immorality, you probably shouldn't be alone with somebody of the opposite sex watching a movie at night. And then some people are like, but where is that in the Bible that you can't do it? Because I've said that to people. They're like, but show me in the Bible where it says it. Why are you being religious? It's not in the Bible. Like, stop. Like, where is it? It doesn't say it. I should be allowed to do it. No one says you can't do it, but you just need to be very mindful of the environments you place yourself in. Is that environment going to shape you, or are you shaping the environment? And I've never met anyone that survived that test, by the way. So you might be the first. If you are, let me know. Don't try it, though. No, don't try it, though. Yeah, good job. And the other thing I was also thinking about with this is everything that we speak, the conversations that you have. If you think that if you think, oh, when you're with a certain group of friends and the conversation just goes to gossip, just goes to speaking death over other people, what what fruit do you think that's going to have in your life? If you like those documentaries that are on Netflix about murder, about kidnap, about people going to prison for doing horrible things, what do you possibly think is going to be sown into your mind and into your heart? But then, even as we think about all those things, I do think it's super important for all of us as Christians to realize that we've been called to actually be in the world. The danger with this thing is to then think, oh, well, I don't want to engage with anything. I don't want to know anything that's going on in the world. All I want to do is be in church. But that's not what God's called us to do either. God's called us to be missionaries out in the world. God's called us to be the salt and light. God's called us to make a difference. God has called you and equipped you to transform the world around you. So what do? Well, I think it's helpful to be mindful of the environments we place ourselves in and just be wise about it. And then I think it's good for all of us to decide and think, okay, this is the environment I'm deciding proactively to be the salt and light into. The moment I walk into this environment, into this room, and this should be wherever we go, but really proactively think, where is that going to be for you? This place is going to be more like heaven as a result of me being here. My uni halls, they're going to be more like heaven. My dorm is going to be more like heaven. My university is going to be more like heaven. My street is going to be more like heaven. My gym, it's going to be more like heaven. Wherever I go, you better believe I've been called to change the world around me, because greater is He who is in me than he who is in the world. And the enemy completely robs us of our calling and our promise by the environments that we place ourselves in shaping and changing us, instead of us shaping and changing the environments we place ourselves in. So I just want you to think for a moment. If you think about your life, what you look at, what you listen to, the conversations that you have, the environments you place yourself in, are those environments, is that what you're watching, what you're listening to, the conversations that you have, is that going to bring life to you and bring you closer to Jesus, or is that shaping you to be more like the world? And I just want you to consider, what should you do about it? Because the question isn't how close can I get to Sodom and it still be okay. The question is, how can I get as close to Jesus as I possibly can for Him to transform and shape my heart, so that I can go into the world and transform the world wherever I go. And the environment test has a lot to do with that. Let's look at the final test. It's called the retake. Can you say to somebody next to you, it's time to retake the test? Let's go to Genesis 18. Verses 10 to 15. So then the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent of the door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years, and the way of woman had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you, about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. But then God said, no, but you did laugh. I find that conversation just so funny. I was going to add another test here. I was going to put in the attitude test. But I thought because it was Mother's Day, I was just going to allow Sarah. But we won't talk, maybe we'll talk about the attitude test in the relationship series, shall we? Or shall we talk about it now? No, it's Mother's Day, we'll allow it. Sarah, if you remember, had before taken matters into her own hands and said to Abraham, take Hagar. She couldn't wait, she couldn't trust the promise, but this time God appeared to her and said, I'm going to give you a son. Even though it was hard for her to believe, and even though she was afraid, and even though she fought with it a little bit. Because even if you retake the test, it doesn't mean the second time is going to be easier to believe than the first time. You're going to need just as much faith or even more. But the good thing about God is that He's in the business of us retaking tests. You're not a failure. You don't get disqualified. You get to retake the test. And I think that today God is picking people up to retake a test that maybe at one point you failed. And He's saying, I'm going to give you the strength and the power for you to walk in it and pass this test. Sarah passed the test and chose to believe. She gave him a bit of attitude along the way, but we're not talking about the attitude test today. She passed the retake test. But let's look at Abraham on the other side. Let's go to Genesis chapter 20, verse 1 to 3. From there, Abraham journeyed towards the territory of the Negeb and lived between Kadesh and Shur. And he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, she's my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, you are a dead man because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Now, how many of you just remember the integrity test from a few weeks ago? Do you remember what Abraham did that day? So he went to Egypt with Sarah, and he was scared of the Egyptians, and he said, look, that's my sister, will you take her? And there was so much that happened as a result of him opening the door to that lie. I believe that there was an open door in the family line of deception. I'll tell you a bit about the story again, but Abraham and Sarah had Isaac. When Isaac married Rebekah, Isaac committed the same lie about Rebekah in Egypt. Isaac and Rebekah had Jacob. Jacob and Rebekah together lied to Isaac to steal the blessing. Jacob's sons lied to him about Joseph as they sold him off into Egypt. When Joseph was in Egypt, Potiphar's wife lied about him and what she said he would do. When Joseph was in prison, the cupbearer and his friend also lied about Joseph, and this open door took place in Abraham's life. And we spoke about how what you sow, you reap. You reap what you sow, you reap more than you sow, and you reap later than you sow. This works for good things and for bad things. And even though Abraham failed in this area in Egypt, after he had failed, God met him again, restored the promise, released more calling, released more purpose, reminded him of who he was called to be, and changed his name, breathed life into him, his ruach, completely transformed him, gave him the Holy Spirit, released him into so much more of what he had in store for him. We find Abraham again committing a lie in an area that he thought he'd never fail in again. I wonder if there are people here today who have made promises to God and have encounters, lift their hands in worship, go to prayer room, do everything that they can, make disciples, but at some point, somewhere, you find yourself, you fail in an area you said you'd never fail again, and you wonder, how did I end up in this situation? As I was in worship just now, I began to think that the reason this is a framework for freedom is because the get back up test teaches us to learn from those failures, to reflect, to be self-aware, to put the safety nets and the safeguards around our life, because God wants us to learn from those mistakes so that we won't do them again. Then the environment test gives us the wisdom to be aware of, okay, if I place myself in this environment, if I put myself in this situation, if I say this or do that, I've seen over a period of time that it doesn't work out well for me. I probably shouldn't put myself in those situations. I probably shouldn't do those things again. And you began to build a picture around your life to protect yourself and to walk in freedom. And for most of us, that is enough freedom for us to walk in freedom with Jesus. But then there might be some of us who, even after you've done that, even after you've reflected, even after you've gone to therapy, even after you've gone to sozo, even after you've gone to counseling, even after you've done the work to be self-aware, even after the time that you've kind of closed your mind off to things that are temptations for you, even after you've protected yourself and watch out for the things you listen to and consume, you may find yourself in a situation making a mistake you said you'd never do again. And you might think, well, how on earth did that happen? I love God. I'm serving Him. I'm making disciples. I'm doing everything that I can. How did that happen? And I came to understand this, that you can't deliver the flesh and you can't disciple a demon. I began to be aware of this because in my own life, I used to struggle like this. As you know, I came from so much brokenness. So much brokenness in my own life and so much brokenness in my family's life. When I became a Christian, I experienced so much freedom. God done so much in my life. But even as a Christian, loving Jesus, I found myself that my heart, it's really struggled to give and receive love. I found myself making mistakes that I didn't want to do. I didn't want to live that way. I loved Jesus. I wanted to serve him, but I found myself doing things that I was ashamed of, and I just couldn't understand why I would find and I would do these things. I was in counseling, I was in Sozo, I had a mentor, I had the right environments in place, I was doing everything I could to focus on God, and I couldn't understand why. Then I had a conversation with my uncle, and he told me about a story that happened in my family's life. He said, "Oh, you know your grandmother, her mom. Did you know the story of what happened with them?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, your grandmother, her mom was murdered by her partner." And the moment my uncle said that to me, it's like I heard the voice of God, and he said, and I felt God articulate it this way: "That's the open door." And at that point, I really didn't even understand what an open door was. But then I began to see how maybe the enemy had a plan to destroy my life even before I was born. Because as a result of that open door, the relationships in the generation above me, in my mom's generation, were all completely destroyed. I grew up surrounded by strong, independent Colombian women, which was amazing, terrifying at times too. But they were all single moms. The enemy wanted to destroy the family unit. My dad's side was even worse. My dad's been in and out of prison his whole life. My dad's mom actually taught him to steal, trained him to be a professional thief from when he was a child. And I began to see how actually generationally these open doors were affecting relationships and were affecting me. And then I began to see how even in my own life as a young boy, I was exposed to stories of adultery and just immorality, and the bad thing about it was that those things were celebrated, and it made it seem like those were things that I should pursue and go for. I remember when I was around 9 years old, a family member of mine encouraged me they were wanting to take me to a prostitute's house. And I was 9 years old, and I was so afraid to go that I kind of ran away from them, and when they saw me again, they'd bully me because I didn't want to go. Then in my early kind of teenage years, very early teenage years, there was a sexual abuse that happened to me. And that opened the door to so much more immorality in my life throughout my whole teenage years. I became a Christian, and God set me free from so much and healed so much in my heart. But I came to understand that there was an open door in my life, that I was disciplining the flesh and I was finding freedom in the flesh. But there was a spirit I had to command and tell to go. God was so kind that before coming to Christchurch, he took me to a place called Onsite. It's a 4-day intensive therapy retreat in America. God provided completely for it. And when I went there, I thought I was going to go and process the sexual abuse that happened to me, because it was the only thing I hadn't really kind of processed, because I carried so much shame to it. I always felt like, it didn't really affect me, so I wanted to work on that at Onsite. But when I got to Onsite, the Lord took me to the first time the door to rejection was opened in my life. It was this picture of my mom and my dad. They were fighting, and my mom tells this story in her testimony that one day my dad hit her across the face with a gun. And I remember I could see myself almost as a small boy experiencing that. And when I was at Onsite, the Lord brought that memory to my mind, and that's what I worked on. And I felt that at Onsite, the Lord closed the door to the first time rejection was open to me. So I came out of Onsite completely healed and transformed by that door of rejection being closed. But even when I came back to London, I still felt like, yeah, that was amazing, but I still feel like there's just something in my heart that's not completely free. So I went to my mentor, Mark, and I said, Mark, I think that there's more for us to do. And he spoke to his friend Emmy, and he said, well, maybe we should do a prayer for freedom. And it was this whole area of deliverance. And Emmy and Mark, they came and we prayed. And I had done so much work already in this area of self-awareness, of working on. So I realized I had worked on the sexual immorality, I had worked on the brokenness, I had worked on my family line, I had worked on things that my parents had said to me. So it was quite easy to get down to put a laser on this thing's head. And then Emmy said to me, well, sometimes when there's murder in a family, there's a spirit of jealousy. Do you think it could be a spirit of jealousy? And I said, I don't think it's jealousy. But then the Lord gave me a word, and he just spoke this to me. He said, it's a spirit of covetousness. And covetousness is basically wanting something other than you had. And it just made so much sense my entire life, and even generationally, how so much of the brokenness actually came as a result of wanting something other than they had. It led to stealing and lying and cheating and adultery and fornication and just so much more. And I just felt it's that. So we named it, and I just said, I renounce. Lord, I ask you to forgive me whenever I've engaged in this covetousness and everything that's come as a result of it. Now I renounce this spirit and I command it to leave. And the first thing the enemy tries to say to us, because he's a liar and a thief, and he comes to steal, kill, and destroy, the first thing the enemy tried to say to me is, I'm not gone. I'm not going to go. You're not going to be free. But it was like in that moment, I felt God say, well, no, he has to go because because the name of Jesus is stronger. So we commanded it to go. And ever since that moment, I say this with all my heart, I've walked in more freedom than I ever have in my entire life. And that's why this is so important for me, because I believe, and I strongly believe that God longs for every single one of us to be free. He doesn't want us to walk how the world walks. He doesn't want us to walk in shame, with chains, held back by our past. He wants us to walk in freedom. Jesus said, I've come to set the captives free. He doesn't want us to fall into these same situations time and time again. He wants us to walk in freedom so that we can step into all the calling and promises that he has in store for us. And I just felt as well, as I was preparing this today, that God is saying to some of us here today, today's the day. Enough is enough. I felt so strongly God's had enough of you retaking the test. And what's amazing about this story in Genesis, if you just read a bit more, even though Abraham failed, God actually just stepped in and protected him, because he just thought, okay, I've had enough of you failing. I need you to step into your calling. I'm going to set you free. And I feel that that's what God's doing today. He's going to intervene in your life and bring more freedom for you than you ever thought possible. Today's the day. No more shackles, no more shame, no more being held back. It's time for you to step into your promise. Shall we stand and pray?